If you have any questions about anything we cover in this or any of the other feedback loop session videos, post a comment on the YouTube page. But if there's any disrespect for any writer whatsoever, that comment is getting deleted immediately. Hello, my screenwriting friends, and welcome to another episode of the Feedback Loop. This is the free weekly screenwriting feedback series where we do a deep dive into a different writer's first 3 pages each week. And I show you what they look like from the producer's perspective or the reader's perspective. We go through word by word, page by page. I'll show you what's working, what's maybe not working, and if something's not working, the writer is on the call with us so we can discuss their intentions and try to figure out how to make that writing land a little bit more effectively than it might otherwise have. If you don't know anything about me, my name is Jeff Ballo. I was an independent producer based in Sydney, Australia for nearly 20 years searching for screenplays. I've reviewed about 30,000 project submissions. I have read personally about 7,000 screenplays, and I've interacted with about 10,000 different writers all around the world. And one of the great challenges that we have is that there's a lot of great writing out there. There are a lot of good ideas. And a lot of people put a lot of effort into this stuff, but it's very hard for writers to truly understand what their work looks like on the receiving end. And until you understand how to put your idea in the reader's mind in a way that they'll understand it, you're always going to keep missing, and there's a lot of work and energy and effort expended trying to make that connection that's really not going to happen. And it's frustrating from the producer side as well, because you're forever looking for that next great project, and you can't really find it. It's very hard to find. So the idea behind this series is that I want to help show you what it looks like, help you understand it, not just intellectually, but viscerally. And in that way, hopefully create better caliber work. Now, today's pages are coming to us from a writer based out of Toronto, Canada, by the name of Metin Guler. Metin has written a script called Wednesday's Children, and it is a post-apocalyptic drama, or maybe thriller. Metin is on the call with us, so we can discuss his pages with him and see where they might take us. When we're finished talking with Metin today, we're then also going to look at the first 3 pages from a familiar story, a familiar script. In today's case, we're going to be looking at the first 3 pages from the pilot script for the Netflix series Stranger Things. Now, Stranger Things was originally written as a spec pilot by the name of Montauk, and it does something really important that I think writers really need to understand. One of the reasons that I selected it was because very often writers introduce multiple characters in the first couple of pages, and it's very confusing. It's hard to understand who's who, and it sort of throws everything off balance. And one thing that this script does really well is it introduces 4 characters on 1 page beautifully so that we have a clear and distinct image of what those 4 different characters are. So without further ado, let's sit back, get ready for the deep dive, grab yourself a snack or a treat or something to take notes with, and enjoy this episode of the Feedback Loop. Interior room day. A man's hand rummages through the ash-covered floor, a mad glee on his weathered face, or is it torment? An old scar splits his eyebrow, long beaten coat enwraps his powerful frame, sword on his back blade style. This is Attila. Around him, ashes blanket pots, plates, countertop, sink, fridge, all oddly mini, toy-like. Attila looks crammed in the decrepit playhouse. He finds something in the ashes, pulls it out. A string of beads that look like blue eyes, worn to protect one from malicious eyes, found in any Middle Eastern country. A sheepy ba. Attila turns to the sound, sword drawn. Torment drowned by surprise as he sees Dylan, 6. sitting by a toy oven, petting a lamb. He wears a palm-shaped pendant with a blue-eyed bead at its center. Dylan shoves the lamb aside, bolts out a doorway his size. Attila, Dylan! Attila drops the string of blue-eye beads, which sink back into the ashes. He smashes through the plastic wall of the playhouse after Dylan. Interior Playtown, day. Attila chases through playhouses, jungle gyms, all rack and ruin. His feet crunch on scattered toys and little bones draped in little clothes. Exterior Playtown, day. Attila bursts out of a hole in the wall into a forest of gnarly, lifeless trees under a gray winter sky. Attila, Dylan! Exterior woods, day. Attila chases desperately, gangly branches whipping his face. Dark figures appear in hot pursuit. The Geiger counter on Attila's belt ticks alive. He draws his sword. The dark figures gain on him, looming close. Attila hustles. Almost on him, they rumble past clearly after Dylan. Attila strains to keep up. Bursts into a clearing and halts. Dead silence. His eyes dart around. It's deserted. A scream. Attila spots a red-headed woman engulfed in fire, thrashing. He dashes to her, whipping his coat off. She recoils from him, the fire burning her forgotten. Attila freezes in his tracks in recognition. A string of blue-eyed beads dangles from her neck. Man in black off-screen. Hard choices make a leader. Attila spots a lanky man in black out of a spaghetti western and a boy older than Dylan staring away at a bonfire. The man in black puts a hand of fatherly authority on the boy's shoulder. Wrapped around the hand, a bloody stained rosary. Silent tears roll down the boy's cheeks. A fresh cut splits his swollen eyebrow. He cradles a cute but deformed puppy licking his hands. Attila bolts toward them, but oddly getting nowhere fast. The boy reluctantly tosses the puppy into the bonfire. Attila screams a silent, "Stop!" The puppy shrieks as it burns. Milton, voiceover, "Boss!" As if on cue, the man in black faces Attila. No longer lanky, the man in black is now Attila himself. And the boy is now Dylan. He squirms to break free from Attila in black, who glares with terrorizing coldness. Attila in black throws Dylan into the bonfire. Exterior woods, day. Attila jerks awake from the nightmare. He watches a meteor break up, flinging fiery pieces across the gloomy sky. Milton, early 20s, a pompous bully, is crouching by him, holding a binocular, hesitant to say anything. Milton, "I can take half and slip around the back." "Boss?" Attila yanks Milton close, cold and terrorizing as ever. Milton continued, "Or we can..." Attila, "What?" Milton, "Take the front?" Attila sits up next to viney remains of a jetliner's fuselage. They are up on a ridge. It's late winter, bleak and dry. The trees look sick, short, and gnarly. Milton cringes as Attila grabs the binoculars from him. Attila, "Kids?" Milton, "Huh?" Attila pauses, then peeks downhill over the fuselage. A walking blur focuses into a ragged one-armed man by a sprawling ramshackle cottage. One arm checks on a roast on a fire by a rusted car chassis and strolls back in. Attila, "On my signal." Milton readies a flag to signal the posse behind cover farther along the ridge. The posse wears black armbands except for Zeph, early 20s, African, tomboy pretty with boxer braids. She has a fierce tongue and a fiercer crescent moon blades. She keeps apart from the others, or kept apart. Attila steals a sip of booze from a plastic bottle in his pocket. He leaps over the fuselage, revealing a head-smashed albino where he sat. Storms downhill. Milton sees the posse pour over cover, shoving past Zeph. He spins back to see Attila halfway down, stumbles after him. Attila's counter chirps as he descends. He draws his sword. Okay, so these are the pages that we're going to look at today. So I have to be totally honest, because my belief is that honesty is always the best policy for you guys. Sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, and I do apologize for that. But I think it's better if you know sort of the initial reactions and the initial sort of feelings and the thoughts that are going through the reader's mind honestly, rather than sort of sugarcoating some of it. I had to read this probably 7 or 8 times before I really understood what was going on. So the first time through, I could not wrap my brain around what I was reading. I've read this relatively smoothly and making the picture quite clear. The challenge that we have is that when a reader is reading through these pages, they're going to be reading faster than the pace that I read at. And I was very deliberate to make sure that these ideas and the pictures of the lines are clear. Whereas when someone's reading it, they're not going to have my encapsulation of it ready for them. So Metin is here. So let's put him on the line. Firstly, going to unmute you. Hello, Metin. Thank you for your bravery and letting us.
Yeah, no worries.
letting us do this. So first question is, how does it feel to have me read out your script?
I know there's like too much in there. I know that.
Okay.
Like in terms of images, I kind of try to put in way too much up front. I guess, yeah. Anyways, just because I'm trying to set up a lot of things at the same time, and that's why I put too much up front. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So let me tell you the number one biggest difficulty I have. Well, I'm going to go through it specifically because there's a lot in here that I think are going to be a lot of really good lessons in this that we can help to take overall to understand this. But I've read this now 6 or 7 times, like I say. And so what I understand that the first time reader does not understand is that page 1 and page 2 up to the very second to last line, that's all a dream sequence.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Then the next page number 3 is basically the setup for the story, the initial introduction to the story itself. Now, the challenge that we have is that this initial introduction to the story itself, we're not really clear on where we are or what's about to happen. Having read this several times now, I've sort of worked out that you have a row of people who are about to probably invade some place, whoever the one-armed guy is at. We don't really... There's something about flags, so it's probably teams or groups or one group against another, but it's not really clear on what that initial thing is. You're setting it up in a dream sequence, which whenever we do that, that's always about establishing a character or a situation or a backstory or an environment that pulls us into the story. Now, the thing about these pages is that you have that. That actually is here. The challenge is that it's presented in a way that's overly descriptive. And so the sheer volume of ideas and images that you're asking me to absorb and understand right out of the gate makes the brain just start to fry and buzz and smoke comes out of it. Okay. So I'll give you an example. So the very first thing is you start with interior room day. Now, interior room day is quite possibly the most generic of all slug lines, right? It says nothing at all about anything. So
that's because I want to start with the reader not knowing even where we are. So I was like, how should I start this? And I was thinking like, I don't want to actually tell them where we are until we see the line playhouse. We're like, oh, okay, he's actually in like a playhouse. You know what I mean? That's why I kind of like, I don't know what else to do there. So I just put that in.
Okay, so the challenge though is that when you send out a script, usually it will be following your log line or following your synopsis or something, so people will often have a sense that, okay, this is a post-apocalyptic story. But that may get separated, right? Someone may just pick up page 1 all by itself with no frame of reference, no nothing. And so if they pick that up, it's borderline impossible, I would say, to understand that this is a post-apocalyptic world until you figure it out, until it starts to piece together along the way. The problem is you're asking people to go with you with nothing to hang on to as they're trying to piece it together. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah, it makes sense.
my suggestion, why would you not want it to be known that this is post-apocalyptic, or that we start in this playhouse?
Um, well, the main reason was that it's like, like in the beginning, like I just want to, I don't know, like I just want to have an opening where we don't know where this guy is, and then there's all this, like, until like we pull back and we see that, oh, he's actually in like a playhouse and there's like ash everywhere, and like he's like, I just want to have an opening where it kind of creates a question in the person, like in the viewers or the reader's mind, as to, like, I thought that would be what would kind of draw the reader in. But you know what I mean, like sometimes, like when in movies, when it first opens up, you don't know exactly where you are, but then you realize, oh, this person's here, like, within like 15 seconds or whatever, or even a minute.
Yep.
So I kind of wanted to do that, but
okay.
I mean, it's not, I guess at the end of the day, it's not necessary per se, I can just tell them where it is, but I wanted to kind of have that sort of an opening where the viewer questions it, right?
Okay, so what I'm going to say in response to that is that you can do it either way. I'm not suggesting that you have to tell us where we are. I don't mind pulling us in the way that you're suggesting. But if you're going to pull us in the way that you're suggesting, you have to be really, really careful with how you pull us in, because every little tiny piece of information, every word, and I'm going to point out some of the words that you'll be surprised are confusing. Okay, so if you have to be really careful with paint. It's that thing that I call image order, where it's about presenting the right images in the right order that shows the reader a little bit of a picture, and then another detail fills out that picture, and then another detail broadens that picture. Whereas if you just go, here's a picture, here's a picture, here's a picture, and we're going, wait, what does that have to do with that? And wait, now why are we looking at this image? Like, if I'm spending my time figuring out what the images are, firstly, and then how they link, secondly, then I'm not being pulled into it. But if you're showing me an image and then you're showing me a broader image, let's go through the first paragraph and I'll sort of give you help you understand what I'm saying. So this is your introduction to Attila. You haven't given us any age for Attila. I don't know what Attila is. Is Attila an old man? Is he a middle-aged man? Is he a young man? I know nothing about him.
Well, when I said weathered face, I kind of thought that, he's not necessarily young.
You did say weathered face, but keep in mind, I'm going to be skimming this or reading it quickly. Okay. I'm not lingering on every word that you've written. And I would argue that if a reader lingers on every word you've written, this will be clear. But remember, 1 page is 1 minute, so I'm going to read 1 page in 1 minute. Ideally, right? So if I read all this in 1 minute, I'm reading it quickly, right? So I'm not necessarily going to notice it. So here you go. A man's hand rummages through the ash-covered floor. First of all, why do you say the ash-covered floor? This is going to sound pedantic, but how about an ash-covered floor, right? Like, we're in a new place. You're introducing us to a new space. Does that make sense? Can you see the distinction?
Yeah, I get it.
So the point is, you're bringing the audience into something they've never seen before and are trying to figure out what's what, who's who, where's where, right? So a man's hand rummages through the ash-covered floor. I don't know what rummaging through a floor means, right? If you say a man's hand rummages through ash, which covers a floor, okay, I can see that he's digging through ash, right? As it stands, this sentence, I can figure out what the sentence means, and it doesn't take me very long, but it takes me long enough to stop and go, wait, what now? That you've slowed the read down, right? Now, a mad glee on his weathered face. 2, 3 ideas in there. mad, meaning crazy, or mad, meaning angry. Mad is a word that has multiple meanings, so we have to be careful when using that in description. A mad glee. A mad glee. I have to figure out what that means. You know what that means because you can see that picture really clearly. But I have to take that second to go, what is a mad glee? On his weathered face. Okay, so now you're piling that thing I have to figure out on top of a description, right? So you wanted me to remember that he's got the weathered face and that's what's going to help me understand how old he is and what you just said earlier, right? The fact that weathered face was going to put that idea there. But you've buried the weathered face within a sentence that I'm having to figure out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it could get lost basically.
It totally gets lost really, really easily.
Okay.
Now, and then you ask a question right off the bat, or is it torment? That's a writer. I don't want to call it a cheat, but that's like a writer thing, right? Is it torment that we're seeing? You're describing something before I even know what I'm looking at, right? You're giving me nuance before I even have a solid figure to look at. Does that make sense?
Okay, so basically you're saying before I say that, I could say that, but before I say that, the picture has to be clear. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is, let me hopefully I can make it clear by reading the whole thing. So then you say an old scar splits his eyebrow. Now keep in mind, splitting is also a verb.
An active word.
So if we say an old scar splits his eyebrow, my brain, looking for just the raw description of what am I looking at, I'm looking at an old scar splitting an eyebrow. Oh no, you're not talking about split. You're not talking about the act of splitting. You're talking about the descriptive splitting. Okay, like I get there, and I get there relatively quickly. But what I'm saying is that in the context of reading through a script, you've slowed me down to make me figure out what I'm reading, right? So then you say long beaten coat. I'm not sure what that is even after reading it a few times, but I'm assuming you mean like a trench coat or something. A long beaten coat enwraps is a word that we're not really that familiar with in general, right? But you're saying, okay, it enwraps his powerful frame. So what you're really describing is the powerful frame, and then you're putting a coat on top of it, right? So you're maybe unnecessarily complicating something that is relatively simple. He wears that thick coat, you know? Okay. There's a thick coat on his broad frame. Done.
Or
right?
maybe I'm describing, like I'm putting physical descriptions. Like I'm putting way too many physical descriptions. To create the picture of this person in the reader's mind.
Yeah. Well, so keep in mind the way to paint a picture in the reader's mind is not to be overly descriptive, particularly in a screenplay. We don't want to be overly descriptive. The way to paint the picture is to show us what we see. Just we see this, we see that, we see that. If you start describing the nuance of this and that and this and that, I have to, particularly if the words could be interpreted a couple different ways, I have to interpret the nuance of what you're describing rather than just there's a guy, he's chasing the other guy, he crunches over some bones and some toys, he breaks through a playhouse. You know what I mean? Like simple. We want to be really careful with over describing. In screenplays, it's always going to work against you until you know that it's clear. Does that make sense? So we want the clarity first, and then once we know we have the clarity, then we can add some descriptors in there to fill out that picture. Does that make sense?
Because I guess like I've seen like some screenwriters where they, not everyone, but I've seen some screenwriters where they write really like detailed descriptions that kind of connect the physicality of the person with their nature, right? Mm-hmm. And that's very descriptive. Like sometimes it's like 5-6 lines almost, right?
Yeah.
So
which I recommend
but
against,
I guess I know I mostly like it's usually like a few words that I see, but I've seen also people do like really detailed descriptions. So I guess I was trying to do that, but
No, it's okay. Don't worry about. don't worry about justifying what you've done. What
Oh yeah, yeah.
the point really is to understand. The point is more subtle and more important than that. So let me finish this paragraph. Sword on his
Sure.
back blade style. So I seriously had to read this for every time I practiced reading this out loud so that I could read it in the group. I stumbled over that line every single time because what are you saying? Oh, you're saying blade as in the character Blade, right? He's
Yes.
got the sword on his back. So firstly, I need to know Blade. By the way, I've never seen Blade. I know what you're talking about, but like some people are going to read that and have no clue what that means. So if they don't know what that means, sword on his back blade style. That's like I don't know what that. So notice that you don't have the words he wears a or he. You're doing the clipped sentence thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which can work if we're with you already. So then you end this paragraph with this is Attila. So what you're trying to do here is have this descriptive, all these little descriptive pieces and then present and reveal Attila, right? This is our character, almost like a grand entrance. That's kind of what you're going for, I think, with this, right? The problem
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the problem is you're asking us to understand all these nuances about something we don't even have of a referent for yet. You haven't even told us we're in a post-apocalyptic world with ash everywhere, right? We're like, what? So, my case to you is that I believe this is all backwards. We need to start with Attila, and then we need to describe. How he looks or what he's wearing, and then we describe that his hands trail through a foot thick of ash on the ground or something like that, right?
Okay.
So highlight, let us know where we are, let us know who we're with, and then go into the description that's gonna fill out the taste for us. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Now you do this a lot though. So the next sentence,
know.
around him, ashes, blanket, pots. Stop right there. Ashes, blanket, pots. Blanket could be a blanket. You are talking about pots and plates and stuff. It could be a blanket. But you're using that as a verb, right?
Yeah.
So you have to really be careful with word choice because if I go ashes, blanket, pots, plate, wait, what's happening here, right? And then all oddly mini toy-like. I understand what you're saying once I've taken the time to figure out what you're saying. But
Yeah.
the challenge that you're going to run into is that as people read this quickly, they're not going to see that stuff. It's not until here, Playhouse, that I know where I'm at or that I even could possibly make sense of what I'm reading so far, right? I personally don't see any reason why interior hollowed out playroom post-apocalyptic day. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to start that way so that my head goes to that. If we start with that as a slug line, for example, then we can say a man's hand rummages through 2 feet thick of ash covering the floor, right? And then that's its own paragraph line, its own sentence, like skip a space. Attila 40, whatever however old he is, right?
Yeah.
He's got a gash across his face. But he's fragile and delicate as he looks at the toys that are strewn, pulls a toy out or something, right? So in that way, it's clear where we are. It's clear who's doing what, and this is that would pull us into the story a bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay, so So I wanted to say, imagine there's at least 2, possibly even 3 layers to every page. So imagine that I'm going to skim this page, and in 1 minute, or even half that time, because there's too many scripts demanding my attention, I'm going to skim through this. If you handed somebody this page and just gave them, let's say, 10 or 15 seconds, what do you think they would pull out of this?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, like what would they pull out of it if they just skimmed it?
For 10 seconds?
Yeah.
They would see like splits his eyebrow, his name, string of beads, blue eyes. There's a sheep or a lamb. There's Dylan there. He's yelling at Dylan. He's running through the playtown, and he's chasing after him.
Okay, so this is one of our challenges. That's what you see. That's not what your reader is going to see, because Playtown, it was my third read before I realized
Oh, okay.
what that was, right? Because we start with interior room, and then we go to interior Playtown, but we don't have any setup. We don't have any. There's nothing in here. If I've missed the word playhouse as I skimmed fast, because if I skim fast, right, I'm going to
Okay,
stay
okay.
on this left-hand side, right? I'm going to say, man's hand rummages through ash on the floor. What's that? Ashes, blanket, cramp, string of beads. Dylan, 6. Dylan, he's screaming Dylan. Okay. Well, I don't know that. And then Playtown, is that a city in Michigan somewhere, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what that, I don't know what that means. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
this is the layer that we have to understand. And the way to understand the skimming layer is to understand that anything sort of within the paragraph can very easily be missed. So if you have a piece of information, a piece of data, a piece of detail that you cannot have them miss, like, for example, the string of beads with the blue eyes. I know that that's important because the lady's burning with the same thing around her neck
Yes.
later
Yeah.
on. But the first couple times I read through this, I don't know what that means. A string of beads that look like blue eyes worn to protect one from malicious eyes. That sentence does not compute in my brain. Found in any Middle Eastern country? Okay, maybe this is a Middle Eastern religious artifact or something like that. Like, I can intuit that this is something that has some meaning, but the sentence itself, a string of beads that look like blue eyes worn to protect one from malicious eyes, I don't know what that means. So does that mean, like, to save us from
Well,
enemies,
people
or?
like usually like in countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, people wear that
Mhm.
to kind of protect themselves from, like, people bad mouthing them or looking them the wrong way and things like that. It's kind of like it's just some sort of a belief, right? That if I wear this, I'll protect myself from any sort of evil, kind of looks from other people, that kind of thing. I said, like, it's like regular thing that people wear.
So let me ask you this: would anyone in a Middle Eastern country, when they read a string of beads that look like blue eyes, would they immediately know what you're talking about?
They would know, yeah.
Okay, so that's a very, very common thing there, right? So it's just a cultural thing that
It's
I
very
don't know what it
there's
is.
bees, there's bigger like stones that they put on their like living rooms or doors. Like it's there. They sell it in like any tourist spot. They sell them. Like, it's
Okay,
very common.
is it something that has a name?
It has a name, but has a name that's just like you wouldn't. I didn't want to put the name because then you wouldn't know what it is, right? So
Well,
like it
because
has a
what?
name that's like
Uh, okay. This is the challenge that we have, though, right? Because you're describe. So we also always have to remember the context, right? The context is we've read this paragraph now and been trying to figure out what's going on. Then we have this next paragraph that's confusing because it's ashes, blankets, pots, and then it's all oddly mini toy like. We're trying to make sense of the language, the words themselves. So by the time we get to a string of beads that look like blue eyes,
yeah.
that could be just plates and pots and countertops, right? Like, it may just be a string. It may just be yet another thing you're describing because
Oh,
it's
okay.
not being presented with a look at this. Now look at this thing. Now look at now here's the action that's happening, right? We always want to look at every page that we write and think of it as what's the action that's happening. If you simplify this whole before he bursts out of the playtown, while he's inside the playtown, in as few words as possible, tell me what's happening right there.
Until that point.
Yeah, just as few words as possible. Just synopsize for me. One sentence, two sentences. I don't know.
Basically, Attila's looking through the ash, and then he finds these string of beads. Then he hears Dylan behind him. Dylan runs out. He runs after him, runs through the
Okay,
playtown and
that
out to the wall.
we don't need. Okay, we don't need to go further than that. So we need to know that we need to know that he's rummaging through the ash. We need to know that he finds the string of beads. We need to know that he's in the playhouse,
Yes.
that he sees the kid, and that the kid runs away and he runs after him. That's all we need to see, right?
Yeah. Also, the lamb is also important, anyways.
The lamb's
Just
important.
that's
Okay.
it. Like he's basically there's a lamb next to him. That's it. So like that's it. So that's all he needs. That's all sort of the reader has to know.
Is that for symbolism, or you're setting something up later?
Yeah. It becomes a symbolism. Yeah. It becomes symbolic and goes through the whole script.
Okay.
He's like because Dylan becomes like the sacrificial lamb. So there's like a symbolism that goes through the whole script. Anyway, so yeah. So that's
Okay.
kind of important.
Okay. Okay, just from a pure screenwriting perspective, right? What we want to make sure is that what you've just described in those few words is dead clear here, right? That
Okay.
comes across above all else. Everything else is secondary. How we
Okay.
feel about Attila, the texture of the world, all that stuff, like the logistics of it, the simplicity and the clarity of it are the most important thing. So we want to make sure that, so what I would suggest to you when it comes to like trying to rewrite to make it more solid,
Yep.
strip everything away, go, okay, I've got, what is it, 4/5, no, 3/4 of a page, right? About 3/4 of a page.
Yep.
I got 3/4 of a page. I need to say this and just narrow it down to that most simple thing. Figure out which order you want to reveal those things in, right? And then as simply as possible, reveal it. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
So, are you sure?
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Like, basically focus on the action, and then if I want to add a few things around it, I should. But first, focus on the clarity of the action, and then maybe add a little things to kind of around it, like description wise, but not too many. Like the focus should be not description, but the action essentially.
Well, at
Right?
the
Is
end
that
of the
what you're
day,
saying?
I need to be clear on what I'm watching, and I know nothing about your world. When you say interior room day, this could be the suburbs in the 80s. This could be my room over here, right? This could be your room right there. Like interior room day means nothing. Like there's no picture at all. So every word I'm reading, I'm trying to figure out, where am I? What's happening? To whom? Why? Why do I care? All that stuff. Does that make sense? So it's there, but it's buried under all this like creative writing, like this way of trying to get, trying to make it drip with symbolism and be entertaining and Lord of the Ringsian or whatever, right? So. And all that's really doing is getting in your way. And I would argue this is not just you, this is not just this script. This is like, honestly, half of all screenplays that I read have this very issue. And that's why I think this is kind of like a really important point to understand, is because every writer does it. Almost every writer that I've seen does it. Because you know this, you know all that detail, and you want to choose just those right words to evoke that detail. And yes, but I need to understand it first before the detail's gonna mean anything. So, for example, I'm gonna need to know Attila first, or a man rummaging his hands through the ash on the floor. That's fine, but keep that as its own separate idea. Separate that. Next, it's describe Attila so that we can see his furrowed brow and he's tormented. Done. Don't give me is he weathered? Is it torment? Is it like, don't give me questions yet. Like I don't know enough yet to be able to go there with you on those questions. Does that make sense? Once we know it's Attila, then what's the next detail? In the ash, he spots this. Or child play toys. We're in a child's playhouse. Reveal it there next after we know it's Attila. There's no, don't hide it from us. We're there with you on the journey, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Don't tease us.
It's always about finding that fine line, right? Like
the balance.
You're trying to make like the balance of, okay, how much do I want to give, or how much do I want to make the reader or the viewer figure things out on their own, and how much I go the other way where I just tell them everything, right? So or make it as simple as possible. So it's kind of, I guess I went too much on one side. where I just made way, like, you know what I mean? Like I put too many things in there where it became too complicated.
You did put too many things in there and made it too complicated. That is true, but I don't think it's necessarily so much that you need to be super simple and super obvious with it. We still want you to take us on this journey. We still want to feel stuff as we're doing it. The point really is just clarity and making sure that it's super simple of what's happening. If you take this detail that you have in this first scene and you simplify what you've written, you simplify and you just present it simply. If you've designed the scene and you've designed the detail of the scene and you have a fully fleshed out story, then just simplicity is actually going to evoke a lot more. Right? Okay. It's when you just sort of be super simple, but you're not really saying anything, that is when it becomes too simple. Does it make sense?
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
I hope so. So anyway,
I guess next time.
What's that?
No, I'm just saying that when I send in the reviewed version, I guess, or when you next time I'll send in the.
Then I'll know if it makes sense or not.
Exactly. Then you'll know.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So let me see. So we run. So you have this issue quite a lot where you create sentences that are hard to understand. So Attila chases desperately, gangly branches whipping his face. Another one of those sentences that I read 5 times before I go, oh, Attila chases Dylan, which is implied, and you're trying not to over-describe things, which is a good thing, but when you say Attila chases desperately, gangly branches, like just think about those 5 words in that order. Wait, what? What am I, right? So it's like, it's the way the words are being presented on the page, particularly when a word can mean more than one thing. So if you say Attila chases desperately, he's not chasing desperately, he's chasing Dylan. He's chasing Dylan desperately. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that missing gap, you're on it because you know what's happening here. But I'm still trying to figure out what I'm reading, particularly in the context of this. Now, let's imagine that you simplified this and you come back and you rewrite it and this is all simplified, this first scene. This might actually be okay at that point, right? It's all context. So if everything's clear up to this point, then I might be able to understand that sentence. I don't know because I don't have that context, but in this context where I'm trying to figure out almost every line, and then I get to Attila chases desperately gangly branches. Oh, he chased. Oh, okay, right. You know what I mean? It's just that pause that makes that makes it. It slows the read down and it pulls the reader out of the story, and so we can't then analyze the story for what the story might be worth, but instead we're spending all our time just going, wait, do I understand what this is? So the other thing is, notice here, dark figures is not in all caps. That's a big problem because dark figures appear in hot pursuit is kind of like Attila chases desperately gangly, right? So it's another one of those lines that could probably mean a couple different things. Dark figures appear in hot pursuit. Oh, dark figures, don't say appear in hot pursuit. Dark figures emerge from the shadows, or dark figures chase after him, or something like dark figures appear in hot pursuit is like, let me put it this way. You could say dark figures appear in hot pursuit, or dark figures, they appear in hot pursuit, right? So do you see how I can read that 2 different ways?
Yeah. Okay.
So it's that kind of language that you have to be careful with. You say the Geiger counter on his belt ticks alive. I like that, but I want you to use the word an or a Geiger counter, because we don't know that there's a Geiger counter. So when you're referring to the Geiger counter, when you use the word a Geiger counter on his belt ticks alive, you're pulling us into your story. When you're saying the Geiger counter, you're assuming we already know it's there, right? You're describing something that we're already familiar with.
Okay,
that kind of distinction is the kind of thing that I'm trying to sort of highlight here. So then, if I missed this because it's not all caps and I don't realize it's a character, right? Then the dark figures gain on him. I'll have that second of, wait, Okay. Oh, I see. It's dark figures. I see. And so I'm playing catch up on that. But they gain on him, looming close. Attila hustles. I'm going to recommend against that word there because hustles can mean several different things as well. You're trying to say that he's getting away. He's trying to get away, but they're gaining on him, right? So we want to just be super clear, simple, clear. Almost on him. They rumble past clearly after Dylan. This would need some sort of separator in here. They rumble past dash dash clearly chasing Dylan, or they rumble past clearly after they rumble past clearly. If you take off the end after Dylan, what is rumble past?
Now that I'm reading it, yeah, it sounds weird. It sounds like they clearly rumble past him.
like obviously they rumble past Dylan. Attila strains to keep up, bursts into a clearing and halts. Dead silence, eyes dart around. It's deserted. That's fine, but it's not really adding anything to the scene. A scream. Attila spots a redhead woman engulfed in fire, thrashing. I like that. I can see that. That's a picture, right? Like that's simple, clear. There's no ambiguity to it. He dashes to her. We could probably whipping his coat off. This after I've read it 5 times doesn't seem complicated, but the first time you read it, he dashes to her, whipping his coat off. I've stumbled over that several times because it's just a odd order of things. She recoils from him, the fire burning her forgotten. I love the poetry of that line, that sentence. I really do. I was like, the fire burning her forgotten. That's a novelist's line. I like that. But in a screenplay, it takes that moment and goes, the fire burning her forgotten what? Right? Like, what is it that it's burning? It's burning her forgotten beads? It's burning her forgotten shoes? Right? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, the poetry of it gets in the way of the clarity of it. Attila freezes in his tracks in recognition. String of blue-eyed beads dangles from her neck. Cool, we can see that. Man in Black, hard choices make a leader. That's fine. You're introducing somebody before we introduce him. That's okay. In the context of how confusing this scene has been for me as I've been reading it, okay, you're throwing now another layer of figure this out now too on it. Attila spots a lanky man in black out of a spaghetti western. Spaghetti western is so takes my brain to another place. Like it's out of place in the context of this. I get you're trying to sort of simplify the description, but you're using words that are going to take my brain somewhere else. Always, the one thing I always like to say is that every single word you make puts an idea in the reader's head. That idea in the reader's head is going to go off in 3 different directions. You want to make sure that the directions those ideas in their head go are the direction of your story. So if you're using a word or those confusing sentences from earlier where you're using a word that's also a verb in a different context, then their brain goes in the verb context away from your story, right? Spaghetti western. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going away from your story. A lanky man spaghetti. Am I picturing Clint Eastwood or something? Like what? Right? So once I've read the whole paragraph, okay, I get what you're going for. The language of it just sends me in different directions, which ultimately the bottom line is it slows down the read and it makes it harder for me to connect with, engage with, and emotionally resonate with your story. So anyway, Man in Black out of a spaghetti western and a boy older than Dylan. Now, we have to remember Dylan, even though we sort of skip past it. So I'm having to compare ideas. Don't say older than Dylan. Just describe the boy, right? It doesn't. We don't need to know that he's older than Dylan. Staring away at a bonfire. Staring away, does that mean they're just like, we're just staring away at it? Or does it mean, which I think it means, they're facing away from camera, staring at a bonfire, right? Yeah. So you're imagining that sort of epic shot of like the man holding the arm around the boy, right, looking at the fire. I see what you're trying to do. The challenge is that the line itself, staring away at a bonfire, could mean that they're just, right? Like, Could you see what I mean by the double meanings of those words? Yeah, so the man in black puts a hand of fatherly authority on the boy's shoulder, wrapped around the hand a bloody stained rosary. That's another line I had to read like 6 times. Wrapped around whose hand? The hand. Man in black's hand? Dylan's hand? Attila's hand? Not sure. But in any event, it's also wrapped around the hand. You're clipping the sentences, which can be good when you're describing action. Another broad lesson for everybody.
Okay.
Don't clip sentences when you're describing a scene or when you're describing detail of a scene. Clip sentences when you're pushing action forward. So if you're talking about a car screeches around a corner, sentence, end of sentence, full stop. Clips another car broadside. That little sentence fragment is going to work because we're already following the action of that thing. If you're trying to describe a scene and you used clipped sentences, we're going to get fragments of an idea, and you run the risk, as has happened here, you run the risk of I have a fragment, but I don't know what to do with that fragment. I don't know how that fits with this jigsaw puzzle I'm trying to piece together of the scene. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Hopefully. Silent tears roll down the boy's cheeks. A fresh cut splits. You like this, splitting the swollen eye? That's the second time.
Because I wanted to kind of refer back to the initial time I.
So it's the connection, like the beads. It's the connection. Could be okay. It's a turn of phrase though. Something splitting an eyebrow. Remember that the splits is the verb as well, but here you have a fresh cut splits, right? Fresh cut splits. Like if you sometimes I think as writers we need to spend a little time really playing with the words, just thinking about the phraseology, right? A fresh cut splits, like that's an odd phrase, right? Like it's just one of those. Always imagine that they don't see the second half of your sentence. And make sure that the first half of your sentence is simple and clear. Let me think about this. A scream. Attila spots a red-headed woman. Cool. Got it. Image order. Engulfed in fire. Got it. Thrashing. Got it. That's a sentence where the image order is correct. Make sense? Cool.
Makes sense.
You say something like a fresh cut splits. Wait, I don't understand so far. His swollen eyebrow. So what happens is I need the word eyebrow in order to understand the first half of the sentence. So the sentence is pointing backwards.
Yeah, I did a lot of that.
Yes, you did a lot of that, exactly. But that's what's going to slow down the read. That's what's going to take it from being a quick, fast read to being like, wait, what? Because any word, and this is why in general we don't want to use adverbs as well, the words ending in ly, because those words are descriptive of something that happened earlier in the sentence. The man runs awkwardly. Right? The man runs awkwardly refers back to runs. So in order to understand awkwardly, we have to think backward into the sentence. And in general, in screenwriting, we never want to go backward. We always want each word to go forward. Each word, each description to point forward. Everything has to be clear to this point and continue to be clear as we move word by word. Make sense?
Yep.
That's a big one.
I know. It just clicked when you told me.
Okay, cool. Attila bolts toward them, but oddly getting nowhere fast. I think this is where you're describing like a dream sequency thing where he's running, but it's that still motion where he's not.
Yeah, exactly.
You're directing.
Because I was trying to say, at this point, I want the reader to know for sure that it's the dream. Right, because there are odd things happening, and now we know for sure it's a dream because this guy, it's the typical dream thing that happens, right? Like he's trying to run, but he can't get.
Okay, but as someone reading it quickly, I'm not as immersed into it as you are, so I'm not going to see it. That is not going to be the thing that's going to make me go, oh, we're in a dream, because I'm going to be like, what does that mean? He bolts toward them, but oddly. Like, because also think about the image order thing, right? Attila bolts toward them, but oddly. if I don't know the rest of the sentence coming, bolts toward them, but oddly, right? It's like he's running towards them, but I don't know, running around like that. Like, what's the motion? Like, what? That's he's oddly bolting over there. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, you know what? I never actually approached it from that point of view. That's pretty good because I never approached it like, oh, let me check the first part of the sentence first. I already assumed that, okay, they're going to read the whole sentence and they're going to make sense of it all together. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't really thinking, like, you're like this word and then that word, you know what I mean? Like,
it's fun. I would argue that most writers don't do that. And I would argue that it's one of the things that it will more quickly than anything else get your work to be more fluid and get you up to speed a little bit more quickly because I call it image order, but there's probably a better way to describe it.
Because whenever you say image order, I always thought image order meaning like, oh, this sentence and then that sentence, right? Like I never thought of, oh no, literally this word after this word after this word. You know what I mean? I never thought about that. I was more like sentence and then this sentence and then that sentence.
Well, I always understand that every single word puts a picture in the reader's head. Every single word. And they're piecing it together with what they already know. Now, this happens in microseconds. Like this happens super fast. So even what I'm talking about here, I just may be slow, right? Somebody else may have read this and it took them half the time it took me. But it still took them longer than the amount of time that it needs to take them for them to have the cinema experience. If you can understand that, like if you can clear that part up, then it's gonna make everything. You'll be able to make everything pop a lot more effectively. So anyway, Attila bolts toward them oddly, getting nowhere fast. The boy reluctantly tosses the puppy in the bonfire. Cool. Attila screams a silent stop. How do you scream a silent stop? But he mouths a silent.
He mouths it. Yeah, he mouths it, but he's like screaming, but there's nothing coming out of his mouth, basically.
Well, but I'm pointing out that question popped in my head, right? So, so it might be worth trying to smooth that out a little. But anyway, puppy shrieks as it burns. By the way, evil. Thank you. What a terrible image to put in my head. But anyway, good. Milton voiceover, boss, as if on cue, the man in black faces Attila. No longer lanky, the man in black is now Attila himself. I understand what you're going for. I think you can, again, using the things that we've talked about already, tighten this up, like clarify this, but I think it's not that far off. And the boy is now Dylan. He squirms to break free from Attila in black. So you've drawn that connection so that we understand. Yeah. Cool. Who glares with terrorizing coldness? Fine, but what does glaring with terrorizing coldness tell us? Attila in black throws Dylan into the bonfire. I would argue you don't necessarily even need to say something like who glares with terrorizing cold. Who glares, right? He grabs Dylan, throws him into the bonfire. Now, what you need here, Attila jerks awake from the nightmare. This has to be highlighted, singled out. Bang. Make it big, make it clear. If we don't know that he's jerking awake from the nightmare, then we're going to keep reading, assuming we're in this nightmare scenario world thing, right? The first time I read through these pages, I assume there's ash everywhere, right? Is there?
Yeah. No, it was only in the dream.
Only in the dream, right? So if I don't know that, so we want to. If you're going to paint these kinds of pictures, we need to make clear in the subsequent scenes or in other situations that we're seeing something different now. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
He watches a meteor break up, flinging fiery pieces across the gloomy sky. That's fine. I'm assuming that's going to have some connection to the story.
Yeah,
otherwise, it's just a random cool visual.
Yeah, it's going to have a connection.
Okay. Milton.
It's going to be like anyways.
It's what?
No, it comes like later on, like there's a big battle and it starts raining basically meteors and like anyway, I gotta comes up later.
Okay, fair enough. Milton, early 20s, a pompous bully. Pompous is an odd way to describe a bully. What do you mean by that?
Well, he's a bully, but like at the same time he's pompous, you know. So that's what I try to put two kind of things, you know, together. But
Okay, it's an odd picture. So all I'm saying is when you're introducing characters, when you're introducing people into a story, always remember we need to know who's who. We have to have a pretty clear picture of them pretty early on. Your description later on of Zeph, tomboy, pretty with boxer braids, fierce tongue, fiercer. I don't know what crescent moon blades, but this feels like a nicer character introduction because I feel like I have a picture. She's an African warrior woman, right? Strong.
Yeah.
Like, that's all I need. This, she keeps apart from the others or kept apart, is an odd sentence. I think I know what you're going for, but again, it's that kind of nuance that you don't necessarily really need. But for Milton, a pompous bully, I don't have a picture of what that guy's going to look like.
Oh, okay.
Because I don't know what a pompous bully is. Like, pompous to me is like I don't know, like a prep school bully or something, right? Like he's a guy who like walks in going, hey. I don't know, that's what I'm imagining, but which seems oddly out of place for a post-apocalyptic story, but I don't know. This little interaction is fine, but we don't know who Attila is now in this real world. We don't know we need a little bit more setup in this real world of what's okay, now that we know that was a dream, maybe a premonition, maybe a flashback, we're going to find out. Presumably, there's a little bit of intrigue. There's something pulling us into the story from that. Okay, I don't mind what that is. By the way, that's
like everything in that dream relates to sort of things that have happened before to him. So, anyways.
Yeah. So, but then we go into this real world, right? Presumably, or modern day, or whatever the distinction of this moment is. And what we really need is we need to know what's going on right away. So, okay, Milton's waking him up, offering something. Can't quite tell what he's actually offering from this. I can see that the power dynamic though, so that's good. Attila sits up next to, I don't know what, I'm not sure that you've spelled this word right. Viney remains of a jetliner's fuselage is weird too. Like, fuselages generally aren't viney.
Well, it's vine covered because it's been there like for like decades, whatever.
Wait, vine covered is different to viney though. Viney remains, right? Like it's. My point is we have to be really clear with how you describe things, particularly because part of what you're trying to do at the beginning of a post-apocalyptic story is really set this picture for us. So we need to make sure that we see that picture clearly and that we understand this world that we're in. Does it make sense? Okay, so they're up on a ridge. It's late winter, bleak and dry. The trees look sick, short and gnarly. I don't know that you need the description of trees because it's not clear what the logistics are. Milton cringes as Attila. Go ahead.
Look, sorry. Like it was the reason why I have to mention that it's sick is because there's radiation around, like there's a radioactive, like because of radioactivity for decades, like things are not really growing well, everything's sick, you know what I mean? That's why like I kind of had to put that in there.
Okay. Do you have the Geiger counter the Geiger counter? Okay, so the Geiger counter's in the dream, so we don't really know if this is if we're going to be pure to what you're setting up and what you're suggesting. We don't necessarily know yet that we are also in this radiation-filled world. So just having trees that look sick, I'm not sure that are we gonna focus on a tree? Like, think about the shot, right? Are we gonna look at the tree and go, ooh, that tree looks sick? Like, is that something that the audience watching the movie is gonna actually have that moment with? Probably not, right? You're describing something that's kind of background, right?
Just a wide shot. It's not really like, it's just a background. You're right. Yeah, exactly.
So if it's just a background shot, you got to be really careful with not sort of over describing it. That's the production designer's job. If you've written this, we know this is a post-apocalyptic story. We know the action of what's happening. Let the people fill it out the way they're going to fill it out, right? They're going to bring a lot of talent to that job. We just have to make sure that the story is clear, right?
Okay.
Kids, I wasn't sure what that means. I'm in thinking about it later. Maybe it's that the kids are on the ridge are kids. I I don't know.
No, he's actually asking like because they had the binoculars, right? He's actually asking, are there kids in there, basically, like in the where they're gonna attack, right? And Milton's like,
Okay.
huh? Like what? Like kind of like, why are you asking me that? Like,
Okay, whenever you have like a kids, huh, kind of a exchange, often the reader is going to be like, "What? What is that?" Right? So I feel like we could probably fill that in with something that
okay,
adds more to the story. Because remember,
okay,
all this you're basically now saying not that you only have one page, but
yeah,
you only have one page in the first three pages, right?
yeah,
So not that you only have the one page, but within this one page, we do kind of want to set the stage of where we are now, and
okay,
maybe or maybe not have some sort of link with what happened in the scene leading up to it. So when you talk about a walking blur focuses into a ragged one-armed man by a spalling, this is another one of those sentences that's like a walking blur focuses what into a ragged one-armed man.
because he's looking through the binocular,
I understand, and I was able to figure it out as if you watch this back later, you'll hear me reading this out. You'll see that I did understand it, and so I could read it properly. But what I'm saying is that when you first read it as the reader, that makes no sense. And then once it does make sense, I realize, oh, you're trying to be clever with how you're describing it. You know, if you
okay,
really want that, through the binoculars, the blur focuses into you know what I mean?
okay,
Because he peeks downhill over the fuselage, a walking blur. Like remember to go word by word, like we talked about
yeah,
earlier, right?
okay, I get it,
If you
yeah.
do that, look for those things that are like, if I was to stop right here, that would make no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, now that you told me to click, I have to go through the whole thing and just make sure that yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. It'll be better for it, I assure you. One arm, and then you're calling him that. So we've only just introduced that he's a one-armed man. You're also introducing the idea of a sprawling ramshackle cottage, and then you're already referring to him by shorthand of his nickname. It's just really quick. There's no time to absorb it. Checks on a roast on a fire. Strolls back in. There's just a lot. You're like throwing 10 things, and having me try to figure out what they mean at a time when I just want to simply understand what's going on.
Okay,
Think of it this way: when you introduce a character in your story, in your screenplay, yeah, you could spend 3 paragraphs describing all the detail about this paragraph, but you could also just give us just a quick little glimpse of who he is, and then let him start talking. And then as the story goes along, throw in another detail, throw in another detail, throw in another detail. And as the story goes along, he fully fleshes out into a character. But at the beginning, we have enough to understand the logistics of what's going on. Does it make
okay,
sense?
yep,
Okay, so on my signal, here's another one of the sentences. He readies a flag to signal the posse behind cover farther along the ridge. You're describing like 5 different things there. He's readying a flag. He's signaling a posse. The posse is behind cover. The cover is further along the ridge. Oh, we're on a ridge? Right? Or, oh, they're on like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's just a lot. It's a lot
yeah,
to you understand it, so it's clear to you, which makes it all the more important to simplify and make things really specific and really clear. Posse wear black armbands, except for then you introduce her. Attila steals a sip of booze from a plastic bottle in his pocket. I wouldn't say steals because we're in a post-apocalyptic world. There's so many. Like, is he a thief? Like, always think through every word that you've got and think if there are different meanings for the word as well. If there are, simplify with a simpler word.
okay,
That's going to be the rule of thumb, particularly at the beginning, particularly while we're still trying to figure out what the world is.
yeah.
Leaps of the fuselage, revealing a head-smashed albino where he sat. I don't even know what that means. He was sitting on an albino whose head he smashed earlier.
he wasn't sitting on him, but like he was sitting next to him. Yeah.
Okay. Too much. I don't know. Look, if it's an important detail that you need, you want to make sure that you find a way to put it in there without confusing the immediate action of what's going on.
Okay.
I guess that's kind of the larger point. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So overall, like I say, if we take the time to sort of read this and figure out what's going on, there's some interesting ideas in here, and could be setting things up nicely. The challenge that we have is that those ideas are confusing and hard to read. So really, no reader's going to give you 5 or 6 reads to make sense of it. Right. And that's the challenge. So think again, just I guess to sum it up, think in terms of the skim version of the story, and then the more immersive version of the story. And the more immersive version of the story, I would also argue, could be like the simple immersive or the full immersive. Right. So you have it. If someone's only going to have 10 seconds with your page, what are they going to get out of it? And you may not be able to identify that objectively. You may need to give it to somebody else and say, take 10 seconds and no more than 10 seconds and tell me what you see in this page.
Yeah.
And
it's funny. I was actually giving these pages like to some of my friends. I'm like, hey, just read it in 1 minute per page and tell me exactly what you thought. Like, and even then, like, they're like, yeah, that's fine. And I'm like, okay. And then I would realize that as I ask more questions, they'll be like, oh, I don't really get this one. And I'm like, why did you tell me that you didn't get it?
Well, and so that's what's gonna be challenging. This is gonna be the kind of a script that you're gonna send it out for notes and feedback, and people are really gonna drag their feet getting back to you. You'll have to bug them to get it, or their notes are just going to be like, yeah, it was good. No, I liked it. Yeah, because they're not going to want to offend you. They're not going to want to. They might not be able to put into words why it's a slow read for them. So it's hard to get good objective feedback when there's too much in it like that. So let me see. Kevin asks, Milton readies the flag. Isn't this an example of show don't tell? We're being told why he's readying the flag. This is a question that came up. Hang on a sec. Milton readies a flag to signal the posse behind cover further along the ridge. No, this is one of those cases where you're explaining why he's doing it. Yes, that's true. To signal the posse behind, but you're describing the action itself and the intention of the action. I would argue that this is fine because we're going to need to be able to see the posse the way this is described as it is anyway. You're gonna need to see the logistics of it as well. So it's not really purely just additional. Kevin, when you talk about show don't tell and how to that we don't want to write anything in there. The point of that general rule of thumb is that we want to make sure that we're not writing something that the audience will never see. So we don't want to say something like Attila, used to be a drunk in his past life, but we're not seeing that on the screen. Like, we want to avoid that because it's not there. But something like this, to signal the posse behind cover further along the ridge, we're seeing that. So that's why this is fine in that sense. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so anyway, let's see. Is that cool? Do you have anything else you want to ask or talk about, or have I covered it in?
I just have one question, actually.
Yeah, sure.
How I mentioned the Man in Black?
Yep.
Because one of the things is that later on, and like in a few pages later, I actually give him a name and I actually kind of give a more full-on description as who this person is, right? So yeah. I guess my question was that is it okay to do that later, or should I just do that now? Because right now we don't really know in the beginning. That's why I didn't want to describe him.
So in other words, we don't know that this is, let's say, Jason later on in the script. So you're calling him Man in Black because of the context of this.
Yeah, exactly.
But then later on, you're going to introduce him and call him Jason. So you're probably going to have a scene later on. This is Jason, who we saw earlier as Man in Black, which is going to feel awkward then.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
That's always a tricky thing. There's no right or wrong. You can use his name here. You can do it as you've done here. This is perfectly fine.
Okay.
When you introduce him later, introduce him as whatever his character names is. Maybe say who we recognize from the dream as the Man in Black.
Okay.
Something like that. You can add that simple little line. It's just a point of clarity at that point. So that would be fine. I didn't have a problem with that part of it. It's more the description. I think the takeaway for you for these particular pages, and
Yeah.
like I say, we can always talk about a million things here, but for these particular pages, I think the takeaway is we have to be really careful about how we word things so that we're always making sure that the ideas are clear and that the logistics are clear. Think the logistics of the scene that you're writing. I'm watching something on the movie screen. When I'm reading this, I'm picturing it as a movie on the screen in front of me. If I'm confused about the logistics of it, I'm not following the movie. And if you're describing detail and that's getting in the way of me understanding the logistics, then you're not pulling me into your story. You're not giving me a chance to care about your characters or have emotional resonance with what's going on. Does that make sense?
So would you kind of say that it's almost like imagine a tree that's like covered full of leaves where you can't even see the branches or anything, whereas the branches is what's important, but you can't see it because there's too many leaves, like that kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that kind of yeah.
Since it's clear to me that you like thinking in symbolic metaphor, yes, I think that would be. I think that's perfectly fine as a metaphor for that. I would almost say though that we might need to know that the leaves are magic, so we don't want to get rid of all of that. But
Of course not.
If
Yeah,
all we're seeing are magic leaves, we don't even know it's a tree. We're just going, why is he showing us leaves?
yeah.
That's kind of I think the takeaway. So hopefully that makes sense. All right. So thank you for sharing your pages, Metin. I appreciate that. Ultimately, the challenge of writing really is finding the balance. The challenge of writing is understanding how to include enough to make the picture clear, but how to not include so much that we're giving the wrong things priority. You have a limited amount of page to make sure your story is clear and give your reader the cinema experience. And so making sure that we actually can do that, making sure that we actually achieve that is the tricky part. That idea of blocking off the second half of the sentence and just reading those first words and stopping mid-sentence, making sure that itself is not confusing or the words could be read a different way. That's something absolutely every writer can do and should do, because I see this all the time, constantly. So now, what I would like to do also quickly, we're going a little bit long today, I think, but this might be a little fun, is to go and look at the pages, the first 3 pages from the pilot script for Stranger Things, which is the Netflix show that got all the buzz last year and is continuing to acquire buzz as it goes along. It was originally written as a spec script by the Duffer Brothers, and I want to read the first 3 pages so that you can see how they sort of introduce you into the story. Now, I don't necessarily think these are a perfect first 3 pages either. There's a couple of things that I would probably change about them, but they do pull you in, and they also serve as a really good example for how to introduce 4 characters in one scene, which is something a lot of writers do, and a lot of writers fumble a bit, so it makes it hard to understand who's who and what's what in the story. So let me flip on over there and read you these pages. Titles over black. 1942, World War II. The United States builds a military base at the easternmost point of Montauk, New York. It spans 278 acres. It is called Camp Hero. 1972, the Cold War. An alleged series of top-secret experiments begin to take place at Camp Hero. December 1980, Camp Hero is shut down for undisclosed reasons. To this day, its records remain classified. Exterior Montauk sky, night. We fade up on the night sky. Dark clouds swallow the stars. We hear a low-end rumble. It sounds almost like thunder, only it is somehow more alive, like the growl of an unseen beast. We tilt down to find Camp Hero military base. It is an imposing cement building in a dense forest. A long-range search radar dish rotates atop its roof, around and around. Superimposed titles, Camp Hero, Montauk, New York, October 5th, 1980. 2 months before the shutdown. Interior Camp Hero tunnel system, night. We move down a long windowless corridor. There is a steel door at the end. We draw closer to this door and closer, and whoom! The door suddenly explodes open. The hinges shriek. A scientist staggers out into the corridor. He is gasping for breath. A hazmat suit melts off his body. We can see some skin beneath. It is burned, shredded, bloody. His entire left arm is missing. He collapses to the floor, twitches, stills, dead. His eyes remain open, frozen in a look of sheer terror. We continue past him, moving into a laboratory. A dozen more scientists lie dead on the ground. They too are burned, many also missing limbs, some heads. We survey the lab around them. There are bulky computers, mysterious analog equipment, and most striking of all, an isolation tank, an upright metal cylinder filled with water. A tangle of electrical wires connect this tank to a metal door frame. The door leads nowhere. There's just empty white space behind it. The base of the door is on fire. We watch as this fire begins to spread across the lab. The flames grow hotter, and hiss. The fire sprinklers kick on. Exterior suburban neighborhood, night. Hiss, the lawn sprinklers kick on. We are now in a 1980s suburban cul-de-sac. Quiet, calm. A row of uniform houses wind up the tree-lined street. Station wagons and other family cars fill driveways. TV sets flicker behind drawn curtains. A few dogs bark. We hear the voice of a young boy, dramatic, intense, mic off screen. Do you hear that? Listen. We focus on a 2-story house at the end of the cul-de-sac. The mailbox reads, The Wheelers. Mic off screen continues. Something is coming. Something hungry for blood. Interior Wheeler house, Mike's room, night. A group of boys, 12 years old, play Dungeons and Dragons. They sit in a circle, their knobby knees buried in carpet. A map is spread out beneath them, along with an empty pizza box, canned Cokes, and the all-important Dungeons and Dragons monster manual. Mike Wheeler, 12, is the dungeon master. He is a cute, moppy-haired kid, classically good-looking except for a birthmark on his left cheek. Mike continued. A shadow grows on the wall behind you, swallowing you in darkness. It is almost here. The other boys lean forward, riveted. We survey them. Lucas Conley, 12, playing as a knight. He is very small, but his loud mouth more than makes up for it. Dustin Henderson, 12, playing as a dwarf. He wears glasses, is overweight, not quite fat, but he'll get there someday. Will Byers, 12, playing as a wizard. Soft-spoken, gentle. Will, what is it? Dustin, the Demogorgon? Will, we're screwed if it's the Demogorgon. Lucas, it's not the Demogorgon. Mike waits for them to settle down. Then an army of troglodytes charge into the chamber. He slams 6 winged miniatures onto the map. Mike continued. Their trails drum the floor. Boom, boom, boom. Troglodytes? So, one of the things that I love about these first pages here is in 3 pages, we set up some sort of mysterious intro opening to this scene. There's this secret government facility. It's on lockdown. There's this weird thing, this fire happening. People are getting burned and melted, and mayhem is crashing and tumbling inside. And then, as we go further in, we see sort of what is this mysterious place. The fire sprinklers kick on, and then we do the transition to the lawn sprinklers. So we're going from this situation to this perfectly calm suburban cul-de-sac, and then the character is also talking about this potentially scary, brooding situation. So it's a nice tie-in between the setup, which really hasn't told us too much about what the drama is, what the situation is that we're going to respond to, or that is going to perhaps open up into the story. But we transition into meeting these 4 kids, and it has this also very reminiscent 1980s style TV show, a little bit of, ET-esque with the government and the cul-de-sacs, or with any number of 80s style shows that have the monsters and it's so you have that initial setup, and then we pull us with this really nice transition into meeting the kids. Now, how are we going to introduce 4 different kids in the same scene? They do it fantastically by they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and we see each of them playing a different character. There's the Dungeon Master, there's the Knight, there's the Dwarf, there's the Wizard. Now, I never played Dungeons and Dragons, so I don't know the specifics of what that is, but if you did, you probably have a pretty clear picture of these kids right away. If you don't have a clear picture of these kids right away, you got the cute moppy-haired kid, you have the small but loud-mouthed kid, you have the dwarf kid who's not quite fat, but he'll get there someday. What a great line as a line of description. You have the soft-spoken, gentle kid. And then you have that they're playing the game, and we're right into a perfectly normal suburban environment where there's potentially this impending scary situation or something mysterious happening, presumably right around the corner, right? It's a simple first 3 pages that pull us into the story. We haven't gotten to the main hook of the narrative, and this is another point that I want to really point out to you guys. If you've watched the episodes up till this point, you see that 3 pages we don't always get to that inciting incident. We don't always get straight into that. The hook of your story. So a lot of people worry if you're going to stop at 3 pages, you're not even going to get to a sense of what my story is about. But we can get a sense really quickly and right away. And by showing a nice little transition from that situation to the cul-de-sac, it's a simple idea, the fire sprinklers to the lawn sprinklers. That transition makes us feel like we're reading writers who understand what this is all about, who understand the idea of connecting scenes, of taking us through a narrative story where the pieces are fit together beautifully and perfectly. So even though there are a couple things that I would probably do differently, they have isolation tank right here, buried in the middle of this section, which really doesn't actually describe much or tell us much. I would probably have highlighted isolation tank all by itself, just so that if we're skimming it, we don't miss that line. I'd probably see if I could add something a little more hooky in there, something that's like an unusual thing. A door with just empty white space behind it. It leads nowhere. It's hard to imagine what we're supposed to be looking at there. I feel like there could probably be something described in there, something that grabs us more intellectually. But other than that, I can't really find too many flaws in this. These are a nice initial 3 pages. Does that make sense? I'm in general not a fan of the we fade up, we tilt down, we move past, we draw closer. You're calling attention to the directing. Now, these guys who wrote the script do end up directing this thing, so a lot of what they're including knowing they're going to be the directors. If you're writing a purely spec script, I'm going to generally recommend that you avoid that kind of thing. But as you can see, if it's the most effective way to do it, it's not against the rules. It's just, I argue that if you're writing it purely to write and sell your script, or you're the writer of the project, generally try to avoid those camera angles. But it works. So if it works, it works. The whole point is to tell a story and pull us into the story and make it effective. You guys have any specific questions or anything you wanted to talk about? Let me scroll through our chat box here and see. Doesn't We Recognize take us out of the movie? So Gloria was referring to something in Metin's pages about we recognize this. So the idea of we in a screenplay. Here's the thing. There is never going to be a definitive do it or don't do it situation. It is a device. It works. It is effective. I can't tell you not to do it because you're going to see it in lots of screenplays, and sometimes, frankly, it's going to be the best way to describe something or to pull us in or to show us something. And if it's the best and most effective way to do that, use it. The problem is the problem that I see is that writers rely on it. Writers use it as a crutch. Arguably, the way it was done just there in the Montauk script, where why do you need to see we fade up on the sky? It's because they want to have this thing where the camera goes like that. That's a camera direction thing. We don't need that, really. We could just describe the night sky, and then we could say, below, the city sparkles, or the small town, whatever it is, right, or the government facility. You can do that with your descriptive words. That said, there's no law against it. There's no rule against it. A lot of people think that it's a perfectly good thing to do. My problem is when you rely on it, and also understanding that a director looking at you directing their script from behind the keyboard can be a little frustrating. And some will simply just change the scene or shoot something a completely different way because they want to own it. They want it to be their directorial vision, not what you told them to do. So if you tell them to do it by the way you describe it, as we saw in the Logan script a couple of weeks ago, then they're going to see the shot. But you haven't told them to shoot it that way. You haven't said we. You haven't said low camera angle. You've just used the words that put that picture in their head, so it was their idea. And then you're going to see your shot. That was their idea, right? Does it make sense? I was referring to... Oh, we recognize him as the Man in Black. Oh, so Gloria was asking about if we add his name later as the Man in Black, we recognize him as the Man in Black. No, it's not necessarily going to pull us out of the story because it's a way to clarify what we're seeing. Always remember that the bottom line is we want the audience to have the cinema experience as they're reading the pages. We want them to, when they read this, feel as though they are sitting in the cinema, looking at the screen, watching the things unfold in front of them. If the Man in Black is there in the script, in the dream sequence, and then we see the Man in Black late in 3 scenes later, but now he's got a name, he's a character. The audience in the cinema has the actor as their reference. The audience in the theater sees Brad Pitt or whoever it is, right? They go, hey, that was the Man in Black. They instantly know. There's no thought about it. On pages, it's just black and white. It's just words on a page. So if we're going to recognize somebody that we saw from before, we can say we recognize him as this guy. We need some way to make that bridge happen that happens instantly for the cinema audience, but that does not happen instantly for the reading audience. So that's why we can go ahead and use that, and it's not going to pull us out of that story. What do you think about the Stranger Things pilot? That was a spec script. That was something you guys could be writing right now with no contacts in the industry, you're just starting out, you're creating your own work, and you're doing it because you love it. That's how they wrote that. So that got noticed. That got where it needed to go. That's the kind of thing that you guys are going to be doing, presumably, to create your stuff. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that's clear. Hopefully that's inspiring to you on some level. If there are no other questions or other specifics that we want to talk about today, Eddie says, very cool opening. Yes, I agree. Simple and not even necessarily something we haven't seen before. The power of that show is going to be that as it goes along, it's building upon that. They're not reinventing the wheel in these first 3 pages. Arguably, they're showing us something we've kind of seen before. But they're showing it in a way that pulls us into the story, that draws us in, that's a narrative we can follow. If then they gradually build and add and start showing us story or character decisions or events or circumstances that we haven't seen before, then they hook us. Does it make sense? So the first 3 pages, one of the reasons I want to talk about the first 3 pages in this series is because the first 3 pages are those pages that are going to let me know if I should keep reading. You don't have to hook me. You don't have to give me the big inciting incident, that big dramatic moment that says, this is the story for me, right? But I do, in those first 3 pages, need to see that this is something that I should keep reading, that this is something that's clear, this is something that I understand as I go through it, this is something that is building step by step by step. If you're doing that, then the judgment happens 5 pages, 10 pages, 30 pages, 60 pages down the road when we see what the story elements are that you're building. Those first pages simply have to draw us in and make us know that we're on the right track and should be reading this script. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's have let's have some fun. Let's keep doing this. If you have pages to send in, please do. If you don't have pages to send in, this will be a short-lived series. So go to thefeedbackloop.co/submit. And that has instructions on how to submit your 3 pages. Hopefully you can see that I'm here to help, and I'm kind and gentle, and I'm going to make this as enjoyable an experience for you, the writer whose work, in Metin's words, I'm ripping apart. I'm trying not to rip it apart. I'm trying to show you how to do it. But anyway, I'm always going to try to be kind and respectful to you. So please do send in pages, and please join me each week, Tuesday at 3 p.m. right here for the Feedback Loop. Thanks for watching, and happy writing. We'll see you next week. And thanks again to Metin for being brave and sharing your work.